The Rochdale co-ops on campus always had a history of student activism. Co-opers protested war in the 40s and 50s, they picketed against universal military training, and they called for boycotts of corporations such as Schlitz for their anti-cooperative lobbying.
We also had a fair bit of pacifist sentiment. I mentioned the Quakers, and they were part of that. But there were members of ours and from Groves who picketed ROTC. In those days, ROTC was a requirement of male students on this campus. And we thought that was improper, especially for a state university. We picketed a parade that the ROTC had out in Camp Randall. We were not appreciated, but we weren't particularly thrown in the clink.
Around the time of McCarthyism, Green Lantern supposedly burned its membership files for fear former members could be incriminated by the House Un-American Activities Commission.
We were interested in a number of things. That was a year after I had led a recall of Joe McCarthy. Got a lot of nasty letters.
This picture I have is when we were protesting more or less the McCarthy movement. In fact, this one, we were sending in postcards urging the Senate, U.S. Senate to censure Senator McCarthy. And it did happen eventually, I think 1956 or 57. And then there was the Joe Must Go movement, you know, that Joe McCarthy must go.
Were there other people in the neighborhood that were not okay with the house, or?
Lots. Well, a number of them who didn't like it. They called us communists. They used the word you don't hear much now, except when certain southern bigots start talking. Miscegenation, and nobody was married with a wife there, you know. But they use terms like that. Naturally, they use the N-word, the N-lover. That didn't matter that much for me.
I think our reputation, at least over on Langdon Street, was that we were very red. But I think if I had to put a single label on, I would say it was mostly liberal. And most, I think, of the House probably voted Democratic.
But the co-ops were patriotic, if in their own ways. In 1946, the ICC provided free housing and education for a war refugee who worked in the Polish underground.
The university used to not list people who would want to have housing available if they asked not to be listed. Or if they did, they would be able to say that only whites should apply. Rochdale, along with me, objected to that because I said that's university action. They didn't believe that. The person's house was that castle.
Many members of Groves, Rochdale, and Green Lantern went on to become well-known activists, politicians, authors, and newspaper editors. Lloyd Barbie, who served in the state legislature, is renowned for his work in civil rights and many other progressive causes. A statue commemorating his achievements stands in the State Historical Society Museum in Madison, right in front of Joe McCarthy, whom he ardently fought against. He talks of his friendship with Lorraine Hansberry, author of A Raisin in the Sun, who lived at Groves.
We were pleasant enough. She was pleasant, but she was just slightly careful and somewhat aloof, some people. I think she thought I was more radical than I was. That's because I was more radical than she was.
During this era, discussion at the university continued of the idea of new co-op dorms to replace the aging and, for the university, economically inefficient women's co-op houses. The dream of some at the UW came to fruition in 1955 when the Zoe Bayless and David Schreiner co-op dorms were built to house scholarship students. 6 years later, a companion to Zoe Bayless, Susan Davis, was built, and a few years after that, a second men's co-op, Henry Rust House. Each co-op could house about 50 students. The 50s saw little growth in the co-ops. It wasn't until the mid-60s that something was stirring in the movement again. In 1966, a group of students went to the local Society of Friends to ask for sponsorship in starting a new Quaker co-op. Wanting to create a more balanced community, the Friends group successfully lobbied the university to allow them to become the first co-ed university housing. This would set the trend for future co-ops and for university housing in general. The next year, another Friends co-op was started. By 1968, the momentum was building and Madison was on the verge of another great boom in housing co-ops, in fact the biggest in its history. The previous year, Madison police had violently tried to quell protesters picketing Dow Chemical for their Agent Orange. Around the country at this time, new life was being breathed into the co-op movement as students became radicalized by the U.S.'s increasing involvement in the Vietnam War.
Tremendously exciting time. Here at the university, black students were getting themselves organized for the first time. In fact, when I arrived on campus, there was a campus-wide strike that closed down the university every 6 months for about the first 2 years I was here. Anti-war stuff, black students, teaching assistants. So it was just a very chaotic, but also very creative, challenging time.
A co-op for international students was initiated in 1968 and set off a flurry of activity. That same year, members of the new International Co-op and Green Lantern went to a co-op conference in Ann Arbor, where they learned of the Inter-Co-op Council, an association of housing cooperatives. They learned from ICC that co-ops could join together and pool resources to make each other stronger. Through cooperation among cooperatives, they could also potentially pool their equity, making it easier to get financing to buy new houses and expand the co-op movement. It was the same concept the University Women's Building Corporation had used in the 30s, and the Madison ICC in the 40s and 50s. The Madison Association of Student Co-ops, MASC, was formed in December of 1968 by representatives of 7 co-ops, with the purposes of educating the community on the importance of co-ops, helping start co-ops, and developing property for them. The group started out as a coalition of all types of co-ops, not just housing. The co-op started meeting and planning projects. A manager was hired part-time to handle financial matters and to help organize events and carry out projects. That year, the group was able to get a grant for $3,000 and secure a loan for $4,500 from the St. Francis House Revolving Fund, enabling them to initiate Summit Avenue Co-op on the Near West Side and Stone Manor Co-op in the Langdon neighborhood, and to help with the purchase of International Co-op. Some of this money was given to New Wine Commune on Gilman near State Street to help them buy their house.